Well, good morning, children. Here we are back again with another Sunday school lesson. Last week, if you'll remember, we talked about 4 people. 3 were in our story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they had a challenge as to whether they were going to be loyal to God or loyal to what the king told them to do. Well, today we're going to learn about the 4th one in this story. His name is Daniel. And he was abducted. He was taken with the other 3, along with other young men, when God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to defeat the Israelites. So he was taken to Babylon. Well, today we're going to learn how Daniel fits in our story. Now, they were only teenagers when they were taken, and yet now we find Daniel, and it's 65 years later, so he had to have been somewhere in his 80s. And once again, Babylon now had been defeated by the Medes and Persians. And now he has a new king. And this is King Darius. Now, King Darius didn't go in and just change everything. He actually took the administrators and the governors that had been over the Babylonian Empire, and he interviewed them, and he chose people from that group of people to continue to administrate and to be in charge. And so he had appointed some different people to be the leaders and the governors and stuff, and he ended up, there was an order of ranking, and they kind of picked some top 3 or 4, but as time went on, he was so impressed with Daniel that he ended up giving Daniel the top spot. And the only one that really was above Daniel was King Darius. Well, these guys were not happy. They were very jealous. They were very prideful. They thought they should have the top spots. For one thing, this guy wasn't even from Babylon. He had come from the Israelite camp many, many years ago. But he had stayed true to God, and he loved God. So they began to plot how they could destroy Daniel and discredit him. And they began to look through the different things that he did as the administrator, and they were looking for places that he was neglectful, that he didn't do his job well, or they were looking for ways that he had maybe compromised and taken bribes or something to change things because he had the power to, but they couldn't find anything. So one day, when Daniel was not around, a group of them got together and they devised a plan, and they said the only way we are going to be able to discredit Daniel is if we do something in connection with his religion, with his devotion to his God. So they all went to the king, and they got to talking to the king, and they said, oh, all of us administrators, which should have included Daniel but didn't, all of us administrators, we admire you, King Darius. You are awesome. You are such a great ruler, and we've all agreed that you should make a law that says that no one can worship anyone but you for 30 days. Well, the more they built him up and the more they bragged on him and flattered him, the more impressed with himself he got, and he didn't really think about what the consequences might be. So he signed into law this law that for 30 days everyone could only worship him. And if they were caught not worshiping him, worshiping anybody else, they would be thrown into the lion's den. Well, now, Daniel, he was rather distressed when he heard the law, because now he had a choice to make. Because he wanted to honor and be loyal to the king, but his first loyalty was to God. And in his house, he had windows that faced east toward Jerusalem. Even after all these years, he still thought of his homeland. And he had a practice of going to his house, and 3 times a day he would pray. So he went into his house the same as he'd always done on this particular day. After the day after he'd heard this law, he did not change what his practice was in worshiping his God, the one true God. And that's what the other administrators had counted on. So he went home at noon, and he went into his house, and he closed his door, and he got down on his knees, and he prayed to God like he always did. Well, the administrators, they were watching. The windows were open. He didn't go in behind closed doors and closed windows and try to hide. He was as bold as he had always been. And they came by and they saw him. Well, what do you think they did? They rushed back to the king, and they told the king what Daniel was doing. Well, King Darius, he was pretty distressed because he really liked Daniel, and he didn't want him to have to go into the lion's den. And he told them they have to wait, and he tried everything he could. But the law for the Medes and Persians back then was that if the king made a law, he could not break it. He couldn't undo the law for the period of time that it had been set. So finally, the king relented, and he allowed them to take Daniel and throw him into the lion's den. Well, that night, King Darius had a terrible time sleeping. He paced and he kept reaching out, just hoping that Daniel's God was big enough to save him from the lions in the lion's den. And when morning finally came, he could not hardly wait to get to the lion's den, open the rock that had been placed in front of the doorway, and find out if Daniel's God was big enough to save him from the lions. Well, the king went rushing to the den in the morning, and he opened it up, and he hollers to Daniel, and he's like, Daniel, was your God able to save you? And Daniel hollered back up, and he said, Yes, King Darius, I am well. When you threw me into the lion's den last night, I immediately fell to my knees and began to pray. And God, in all of his strength and his majesty, he sent an angel into the den, and the angel shut the mouths of the lions. So I spent a night in safety and under the hand and the protection of my God. Well, the king, he was so excited by this news, and he was so impressed that he made another commandment, that the people were only to worship Daniel's God. So he removed Daniel from the lion's den. Of course, the angel was gone, and King Darius threw the administrators that had tried to have Daniel killed into the lion's den, along with their families, and the lions devoured them before they ever really hit the bottom of the cave. It's important for us to remember that our choices have consequences for other people. Whether we choose to live our lives just for ourselves and trying to get all the glory for ourselves, or if we choose to live loyal to God. God is faithful, and he will protect us, and he takes care of us. But more than protecting us, just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said last week, they said even if he does not protect us from everything bad that could happen to us, we are still going to serve him and him only. I pray that this will be your heart that you will not seek to be the most popular and the most important and the top of the heap, but that you will let God run your life. You will let God be the one that decides what positions you have, and always be faithful and loyal to Him. I just pray you have a great week. In Jesus' name, bye.